Welcome to the AV-42C. First, let's keep the bird from rolling away by using the brake. Now let's move on to the startup sequence. First, turn on the main battery. This will store power. Now start the auxiliary power unit, or APU. This will keep the battery charged while we complete the startup. Wait a moment to allow the APU to spool up. We're now ready to start up the engines. Keep an eye on the engine gauges and wait for the RPM to settle. The engines are now supplying electrical power, so we can turn off the APU. Now we can turn on the heads-up display. The HUD, or heads-up display, shows you attitude, altitude, velocity, targeting reticles, and other important flight data at a glance. Now turn on the multifunction displays, or MFDs. The MFDs give you access to aircraft features such as weapon configuration, navigation maps, sensors, etc. You can access these features by pressing the corresponding buttons around the edge of the monitor. You'll learn more about the features of the MFDs in a later tutorial. The vehicle is now ready to fly. In the next tutorial, we'll talk about basic flight controls, taxiing, takeoff, and landing. Welcome to the basic flight tutorial. We'll skip the startup procedure now and pick up where we left off in the last one. The main flight controls are the joystick and throttle. You can grip them by holding the grip buttons, or toggle lock your hands to them by tapping the grip buttons. Let's start with taxiing. Grab onto the main flight controls now. To steer the front wheel, you will have to twist the joystick on the vertical axis. In order to get moving, we need to tilt the engines to the forward position. Start by holding the throttle trigger to lock the wheel brakes. Then, press and hold up on the throttle thumb control to tilt the engines forward. The indicator here shows the status of. Now if you release the brakes and slightly lift the throttle lever, you will start to roll. Apply small amounts of throttle or brakes to control your speed. Don't go too fast. Try taxiing over to the marked waypoints. Okay, stop here. Throttle down and hold the throttle brake trigger. Let's prepare for a conventional takeoff. Set the brake lock so you can free up your hands. Remember, if your hands... Set the flaps to position 1. Make sure all flight assists are enabled. They should be already. Double check that the engines are tilted all the way forward. The indicator should read 0. Now grab the throttle again and hold the brakes. While holding the brakes with your left hand, you can disable the brake lock with your right hand. Okay, now taxi onto runway 20. Now to take off, raise the throttle to full and steer to keep aligned with the runway. Keep speeding up straight down the runway. Now carefully rotate the joystick back to pull the nose up. Great, you're in the air. Now you can raise the landing gear and set flaps to 0.
Landing gear.
Now gently steer your nose up to about 20 degrees and keep climbing. Let's practice with the basic flight controls. Rotate the joystick left or right to roll towards your target. Rotate the joystick forward or back to pitch your nose towards it. This icon on the heads-up display shows your velocity vector, which is the direction you're actually moving. Fly over to the target waypoint. Try to keep your movement smooth and avoid pulling too hard, as this can cause a stall. Fly over to the next waypoint. Great flying. Now let's try landing at the airbase. Start your landing at the next waypoint. Bring your speed down as you approach it. This will be a conventional landing on the runway.
Over G.
Line up with the runway and continue to bring your speed down. You can use the trigger on the throttle to control the air brakes. Free your left hand to bring your flaps and landing gear down. Then continue to bring your speed down. Maintain your speed and glide slope. Keep your vector on the target. Getting close. Prepare to flare your nose up for a nice smooth landing. Touchdown. Gently bring your nose down now. Keep steering down the runway. Throttle down and carefully apply brakes. Congratulations! This concludes the basic flight tutorial. Next time, we'll make use of the tilting engines and practice vertical takeoffs and landings. Welcome to the basic weapons tutorial. Today we will be covering weapon configuration, target acquisition, and firing weapons. Let's start by setting the MFDs to the pages we will use. Equip page shows what you have on each of the vehicle's equipment mounts. It displays information on each item and allows you to arm, disarm, configure, or mark them for jettison. We'll go over each feature in more detail later. The TGP, or targeting pod, is what you will use to acquire ground targets. To use it, first you must supply power to the sensor mounted underneath the nose of the vehicle. The TGP will be in forward mode by default, which just looks straight forward. To be able to control it, you must designate the TGP as the Sensor of Interest, or SOI. Now, you can sleeve the targeting pod around using the thumb control on your joystick. When you move the sensor, it'll automatically switch to target mode, which locks its focus point onto the ground while you're flying. The yellow arrow on the screen shows the relative bearing to the target point. The target point also shows up on the nav map as a yellow cross. Now let's find some targets. Take off and fly to the objective waypoint. We'll pick it up when we get there.
Landing gear.
Now that we're in the area of operations, you can enable the master arm switch. With the weapon system armed, you'll see some new icons on the heads-up display. At the center, you have the weapon targeting reticle, or pepper. Up here, you have weapon type, name, and shots remaining. You can cycle through all the armed weapons by pressing the button on the joystick. These unguided weapons can be fired simply by pulling the trigger on the joystick. You have limited stores, so save your rounds for the targets. Let's try deploying the GAU-8 on some ground targets. In a moment, you will receive a mission objective. You can auto-seal your TGP to the objective waypoint by pressing the waypoint button in the TGP screen. Go ahead and destroy the tanks at the objective waypoint.
Altitude.
Great job. Now let's work with rockets. Hyrdra 70s are small, unguided rockets. By default, each pull of the trigger will fire one rocket. However, they can be configured to launch rapidly. This is called ripple firing. To access a weapon's config menu, set the equipment MFD page to config mode. Then select the weapon you want to configure. If you have multiple of the same weapon type mounted in different locations, your settings will be copied over to all of them. Try setting the rockets to different ripple intervals and destroy the next set of targets.